On the very edge of a small village located deep within the jungles of South Asia, there lived a man named Adrian. Tired of the noisy city life, he decided to settle in a secluded place, far from civilization. Every day, Adrian explored the area around his new home, enjoying the peace and beauty of the wild nature. One hot summer day, when the sun was blazing through the thick foliage of the trees, Adrian heard a strange sound. It was a muffled cry that seemed to come from deep in the jungle. The cry had a mixture of panic and desperation that sent a chill down Adrian's spine. He stopped and listened, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It seemed to be coming from behind an old, twisted banyan tree near a swampy area. With each passing moment, the cries grew louder and more desperate. Driven by curiosity, Adrian put down his bag and headed toward the sound. Adrian's heart was pounding with excitement as he pushed through the thick bushes. The humid jungle air made it hard to breathe, and sharp branches scratched at his clothes, but he kept moving forward. As he got closer to the banyan tree, the underbrush became thinner, and the cries grew clearer and more piercing. Finally, after pushing through the last of the bushes, Adrian saw a scene that shocked him deeply. In a flooded hollow in the forest, formed by recent heavy rains, a young tiger cub was desperately struggling in the murky water. Its attempts to stay afloat were getting weaker by the second. The cub's eyes were wide with fear as it tried to keep its head above the surface of the muddy water. For a moment, Adrian froze, assessing the situation. He knew that tigers were dangerous, especially when they were scared, but he also understood that if he didn't act, the cub would surely drown. Quickly looking around for any sign of the cub's mother, Adrian saw no indication that she was nearby. Deciding to act immediately, Adrian cautiously approached the edge of the water. He took off his shoes and rolled up his sleeves, preparing to enter the muddy pond. His heart was racing as he stepped into the cold, slimy water, creating strong ripples with each step. The water was deeper than it appeared at first glance. It quickly soaked Adrian's clothes and chilled his skin, but he couldn't take his eyes off the struggling cub. Slowly extending his hand, Adrian tried to calm the frightened animal with a gentle voice. "It's all right, little one. I'm here to help you." The cub, sensing the presence of a human, seemed to calm down slightly. Its frantic movements stopped as Adrian approached. Finally, within arm's reach, Adrian carefully slipped his hands under the water and gently lifted the cub. The young tiger was surprisingly light. Its small body was shivering from cold and fear. Adrian held it close to his chest, trying to warm and soothe it. Slowly and carefully, he began to make his way back to the shore, carrying his precious load. Once on the bank, Adrian gently set the cub down on the ground. The cub was wet and scared but seemed unharmed. Now that the immediate danger was over, Adrian began to wonder where the cub's mother could be. Looking around, he noticed a faint glint of metal in the thick vegetation nearby. Cautiously approaching, Adrian saw a horrifying sight. The mother tiger was caught in a cruel trap. Her hind leg was clamped between the iron jaws of a trap that was chained to a tree trunk. She had been struggling to free herself, but each movement seemed to cause her more pain. Her eyes were wide with panic and despair as she tried to reach her cub. Adrian's heart ached at this sight. He finally understood why the tigress hadn't been able to save her cub. She herself was trapped, unable to help. Now her desperate growls were full of anxiety and pain. Adrian knew he needed to act quickly. He couldn't leave the tigress in such a state, but freeing a wild and wounded predator was extremely dangerous. He began to examine the trap and the lock, thinking of how to free the tigress without causing her more suffering. But before he could take any action, Adrian heard the crunch of dry leaves and the low murmur of approaching voices. His heart froze as he realized someone was coming straight toward them. It was likely the people who had set the trap. Adrian quickly scanned the area, looking for a place to hide with the cub. He knew that an encounter with strangers in such a situation could be extremely dangerous. Acting quickly and decisively, Adrian gently placed the cub in the thick bushes, making sure it was well hidden from casual view. Then he took a position where he could observe the approaching people without being seen. Soon, two men in dirty, worn-out clothes appeared from behind the trees. They had rifles slung over their shoulders and were carrying several traps and chains. They were talking quietly to each other, unaware of Adrian's presence. As the men approached the spot where the tigress was trapped, Adrian heard their conversation. "Check that tigress," one of them said, pointing to the captured animal. "A pelt like that could fetch a good price." Adrian felt a surge of anger rise within him. He realized that these were poachers, hunting wild animals for profit. But what could he do? He was alone, unarmed, and they were armed and clearly very dangerous. While Adrian frantically considered his options, the poachers drew closer to the tigress. She growled and tried to lunge at them, but the chain held her firmly. One of the men took out a set of keys, apparently to unlock the trap. In that moment, Adrian realized he had a chance. If he could distract the poachers, he might be able to free the tigress. He picked up a small rock and threw it into the bushes some distance away from where the cub was hidden. The sound caught the poachers' attention. They turned sharply, raising their rifles. "What was that?" One of them whispered. "Go check it out," the other replied, nodding toward the source of the noise. As one of the poachers went to check the bushes, Adrian seized the moment. He quickly and quietly approached the abandoned equipment and grabbed a heavy wrench, which might work to open the trap. Adrian's heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of his chest. He knew he only had a few seconds before the poachers returned. Moving quickly but carefully, he approached the tigress. The animal looked at him warily but seemed to sense that this man was trying to help her. Adrian spoke in a quiet, calming voice as he worked on the trap's lock. "Easy, girl. I'm here to help. Just hold on a bit longer." Finally, after a few tense moments, the lock gave way. The trap opened, and the tigress was free. For a moment, she stood still, as if not believing her freedom. Then, limping slightly, she took a few steps forward, keeping her eyes on Adrian. Just then, the poachers returned. Seeing the tigress free and Adrian holding the wrench, they froze in shock, but it only lasted a second. One of them raised his rifle, aiming at Adrian. "You idiot! Do you know how much that tiger is worth?" the poacher snarled. Adrian knew he was in deadly danger. He slowly raised his hands, trying to show that he wasn't a threat. "Listen, let's just walk away. No one got hurt, and we can all just leave." But the poachers were furious. They moved closer to Adrian, their faces twisted with anger. "You ruined our hunt," said the second poacher. "Now you're going to pay for it." Adrian realized his situation was hopeless. He was unarmed against two armed men, and there was no help coming. He closed his eyes, expecting the worst. But suddenly, a loud roar filled the air. The tigress, who everyone thought had left, leaped between Adrian and the poachers. Her eyes blazed with fury as she took a defensive stance in front of the man who had just freed her. The poachers backed away in terror. They hadn't expected a wounded animal to defend a human. The tigress took a threatening step forward, and that was enough. The poachers turned and ran, stumbling and falling in their rush to get away from the angry predator. When the sound of their footsteps faded, the tigress turned to Adrian. Their eyes met, and in that moment, there was a silent understanding between them. The tigress tilted her head slightly, as if in gratitude, and then slowly moved toward the bushes where her cub was hidden. Adrian stood still, watching as the tigress gently nudged her cub, encouraging it to follow. Together, they slowly disappeared into the depths of the jungle, leaving Adrian alone with his thoughts. This event had a profound impact on Adrian. He realized that even in his desire for solitude, he couldn't ignore the problems facing the wild world around him. From that day on, he became more attentive to his surroundings, striving to balance his need for solitude with the need to care for the world around him. Adrian started interacting more with the villagers and spending more time in the jungle, closely observing nature and listening to the sounds of the forest, always ready to help if needed.